And joining me now for an exclusive interview is Kurt Volker, former US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations and US Ambassador to NATO. Good evening to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
So on a day of such dramatic developments, Washington attacking Venezuela, capturing its leader, bringing him back to America, and Donald Trump saying, well, look, I'm going to run the country. Many watching tonight will be asking two things. What does that look like? And what does all of this mean for the world at large?
Yeah, well, the first part is a really interesting question because the only way the U.S. could effectively run the country is if we're going to be using the Venezuelan police, the state administration, the military, and so forth that are already there. And so what seems to be happening is the U.S. is going to be providing some kind of umbrella over the vice president of Venezuela who will take charge and run things until a different transition can be arranged.
I guess the question is, Nicolás Maduro is widely regarded as having been illegitimate. But Mr. Ambassador, given your extensive experience in various White House administrations, I'm interested, do you believe that the President of the United States has crossed a red line?
It's a really tough question, and I think it'll really depend on how things play out, because think about what this means now. He just gave a warning to Iran, to the mullahs, about cracking down violently on protesters in Iran. They will now take that warning more seriously, given what just happened in Venezuela. Second, when it comes to the border, the U.S. southern border, drug trafficking, states taking advantage, basically, of the openness of the U.S., they're going to be thinking twice about that as well. I think China will have been struck by the use of military force. Trump, of course, has been seen as an isolationist at times, but this is anything but isolationist. This is very aggressive. So I think it's going to cause a lot of countries to recalculate.
Why do we see America so brazen in Venezuela, making these threats as well to Iran? But for example, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, seemingly more hesitant, tiptoeing around the issue?
Yeah. Well, I think with Venezuela, there are several things. One of them, it is a weaker country. It doesn't have nuclear weapons. It's also in the hemisphere, in the Western Hemisphere, which Trump has singled out as something of special concern for the United States. And it was a source of drug trafficking and other nefarious activities coming to the U.S., as well as instability in South America and Central America. So there are a lot of things that are of direct U.S. interest there. And in contrast, Trump has not defined Ukraine's democracy, Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine's success as a vital U.S. interest the way that other U.S. administrations have done. Even so, I think that Vladimir Putin will have to take note of Trump's willingness to use force and the effectiveness of that force when he was willing to do so. And what I think we see in Ukraine right now, Putin has sided with Venezuela. He has lied to Trump several times, including most recently about this Ukrainian drone strike. And I think Trump is trying to signal to Putin it is time for him to end the war, or things will get worse for Putin now too.
You mentioned the Western Hemisphere. Just over a month ago, the White House released that national security strategy, the one that talked about Europe facing civilizational erasure, but of course also that 19th century Monroe Doctrine. Tonight, Donald Trump saying that doctrine has been superseded. He even joked about a Don Roe Doctrine. Are we seeing a Washington unashamedly putting its power above all else, and I guess really practically building back these walls and spheres of influence?
I'd say under President Trump, yes, that is very much what he's doing. He is willing to use force, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, and show that a sphere of influence, as you say. I'm not sure that he recognizes other countries having spheres of influence, however. I don't think there's a recognition of China having a sphere of influence in East Asia. And I think the jury is still out with Putin. I think that he has strengthened NATO. He has urged peace in Ukraine and urged a ceasefire. So we have to see how he continues with Putin going forward, knowing that Putin has played him and lied to him time and again.
What about China in all of this? You mentioned China. Venezuela, of course, has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. China is Venezuela's biggest customer for oil exports. Mr. Maduro also pictured meeting with Chinese officials just this week. Is President Trump trying to send a message here to Beijing to tell Xi Jinping, look, back off the turf of the North and South American continents?
I think there is a message in that, and also a message to China that we are in a stronger position than they think. I think China has underestimated the U.S., especially over the past few administrations where we have not acted assertively. I think this is a message to China. We have both the capability and the will to play a very strong role. And that should cause China both to back off the Western Hemisphere, but also to tread carefully in East Asia.
Renowned historian Peter Frankopan wrote today that if Trump can do this to Maduro, why not Putin to Zelensky? On the question of international law, how dangerous a precedent could this set of global superpowers being ready and willing to take international law into their own hands?
Yeah. Right. Well, in terms of international law, it is very troubling because whereas the United States has framed this as a domestic law enforcement issue, Maduro was indicted on drug charges and arrested officially under DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, for trafficking drugs into the United States. So that's the legal basis, which is a domestic legal basis rather than an international one. But the comparison is exactly right. Putin has indeed tried to assassinate Zelensky several times, has been unable to do so, and that's one of the main differences is Russia has much weaker capabilities. But in terms of the legal argumentation, other countries will certainly make the legal argument that they have a similar right to the United States based on their own domestic law to say that they're going to go and topple another leader.
And French Foreign Minister Barrot, he says the military operation to capture Maduro is, quote, violating the principle of non-resort to force that underpins international law. Can we say, with the facts in front of us tonight, that Donald Trump has broken international law?
I think that we have different interpretations there. So just as you said, the French Prime Minister would say that's their interpretation. But again, the U.S. interpretation is going to be very different from that, that Maduro had broken international and U.S. domestic law, and he was arrested under U.S. domestic law. That'll be the interpretation that they make. So I don't think it's quite as black and white as that.
Now, on the flip side, is there an argument, Mr. Ambassador, to be made that strong men like Maduro, like Iran's supreme leader, like Vladimir Putin, only understand the language of force, and that Donald Trump is in his right to use violence to compel change?
Yeah, well, again, we're going to have different views about whether he's within his rights or not. But in terms of understanding the way these strong men think and behave and how to actually influence them, Donald Trump is right that force is the way that they respond to things. And as you pointed out, sadly, we've not been willing to exert more pressure and show more force toward Vladimir Putin because he thinks the same way as these other strongmen.
The Kremlin has already condemned these American strikes. Does what's happening in Venezuela, and our correspondent in Kyiv earlier pointed this out, risk shifting attention away from Ukraine? Or could it serve as a reminder, I guess, to the White House that Russia has been, in some ways, Maduro's enabler?
Yeah, I think the latter, actually. I think what I've been struck by in some of the news coverage and even some of the things that President Trump has said today, it is a recognition that Putin has been on the side of Maduro. He even made a comparison to the ineffectiveness of Russia's military forces. So I think he is seeing Russia today, at least, through the light of their affiliation with Maduro.
Now, we're running out of time, but some will say a country that pushes allies and friends away, that acts with force when it so desires, is a bully. Is America acting like a bully?
Well, as you're saying, some people will say that, and they'll say we are just letting might drive. We have the capability. We'll just do whatever we want. That might makes right. Some people will make that argument. It'll be interesting, as I said, to see how this shakes out over a few days and weeks, because in some ways, while this is troubling from an international legal point of view, if it actually does make Venezuela better, makes the world better, pushes back some of these dictators who have been taking advantage of a liberal world order, well, that might be a salutary effect.
Mr. Kurt Volker, former US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations and former US Ambassador to NATO. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for the very latest. I'm Dahmen. Good night.